And we continue at 2:06 in the afternoon on the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wang has the day off. He'll be back with us on Monday. 800-222-5222 is the telephone number. 1-800-222-5222 on this Jimmy Buffett Friday. With the weekend so close, you can almost taste it. And it tastes a lot like a pina colada. All right. Even though it is a Friday, and even though it is in the middle of summer, there is a whole lot of news that's breaking, including in Washington, D.C., where apparently Dan Bongino, who used to be a host on this radio station from 9 to noon, both on KABC and KSFO, is now threatening to leave the government. He's working for the FBI. He's the number 2 at the FBI right now. And he apparently is so upset at the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, for not releasing the Jeffrey Epstein list that he's threatening to walk. I guess he called in sick at work today, didn't show up, and now he's saying if it's me or her, one of us has to go. The world is not big enough for the two of us. So if that's not big enough, then Kash Patel, who is in charge of the FBI, says if Dan Bongino leaves, then I go too. That's according to reporting from the Daily Wire. So it looks like they're going to force President Trump to make a decision as to just exactly which side he's on. Is he on the side of Attorney General Pam Bondi, or is he on the side of Dan Bongino and Kash Patel? But on a Friday afternoon, I'm sure that's the last thing in the world he wanted to deal with today. Joining us to talk about this and much, much more is the New York Times bestselling author and the host of The Stone Zone, which is on WABC in New York, which has a flamethrower of a signal, really covers the entire East Coast. That's on Monday through Friday at 8 o'clock in the evening Eastern, and on Sundays at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, also Eastern. You can get them online at stonecoldtruth.com and follow him on X at Roger J. Stone Jr. Roger Stone, welcome.
John, I'm delighted to be back with you, and I hope Tom Arnold is tuned in.
Okay. Well, you and I first met when I was filling in for Larry King, and I've said this to people before, Roger, and maybe you feel the same, I don't know. But we did that show after they transitioned from the cheap old Light Bright set to the new set that costs $1 million, and I wish that we would have done it on the cheap old Light Bright set because that's the iconic Larry King set.
Yeah, Larry was an iconic guy. I mean, he and I both preferred suspenders. He had me on when I wrote my book in which I made a comprehensive case that it was Lyndon Baines Johnson who was the linchpin of the conspiracy that involved the CIA, organized crime, and the banks, Big Texas Oil, to kill John F. Kennedy. And it was a lively interview, to say the least. I'm not sure Larry believed it, but the book became a New York Times bestseller. And it stands up pretty well, particularly in view of these more recent CIA disclosures.
Did you ever see that clip where Trump was on with Larry King and he told Larry that he had the worst breath he's ever smelled before?
Yeah, yes. Yes.
All right. Well, let's talk about what's going on in Washington right now, because it looks like it's Bongino and Patel versus Attorney General Pam Bondi, and the world is not big enough for the three of them. What do you see going on there, and what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think we need full disclosure here. And it seems to me the easiest way to do this would be for the president to direct his attorney general to direct the interim U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York to unseal all of the documents, including the grand jury testimony and the search warrants surrounding the Trump administration's prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein for both child sex trafficking and conspiracy to commit child sex trafficking. I think that grand jury testimony would reveal what he was doing and who he was doing it with. There's clearly an overall problem here, John. I mean, under Pam Bondi, we have no prosecution for mortgage fraud against New York Attorney General Letitia James, although there was a criminal referral. She had a 22-year crime spree of mortgage fraud. We're talking about crimes that other people went to jail for. No action by Pam Bondi, even though there was a formal referral from the Federal Housing Finance Administration. No prosecutions regarding Russian collusion, although clearly Special Counsel John Durham's report and a new report last week by the CIA demonstrate that former CIA Director John Brennan, former FBI Director James Comey, and others participated in the greatest single dirty trick in American political history, an abuse of power in which the full authority of the U.S. government was used, using two pieces of fabricated evidence to try to topple a duly elected president. No prosecutions from Ms. Bondi. The inaction of our Justice Department is a little shocking.
I read the book about Roger Ailes, a man you know well and you've worked with for many years. And it was the Gabe Sherman book. That was the book that was regarded as the unflattering one, but I didn't think it came off that bad. But one of the things that he said in the book was that Ailes had a very specific kind of managerial style, where he was fine if his employees didn't get along with one another and they fought back and forth, because if they fought back and forth with one another, they'd report back to him, and the loyalty would be to him and not to one another, and he would also know everything that was going on in the organization, and he thought a little healthy competition was good for the organization. Let each of them compete with one another and you'd get the best product. Knowing Donald Trump and his managerial style, when he has two employees, or I guess two versus one, going at it with one another, is that something he welcomes? Is that something he's okay with? Or is he going to look at this as a problem where someone has to go?
I think he's going to view this as a problem. I mean, I must tell you, despite the fact that he's had an extraordinary several weeks, I mean, he wins at the Supreme Court that rules that these district judges that have been forum shopped by left-wing groups trying to challenge various parts of his agenda as approved by the American people in the last election cannot do so. He wins the tariff battle. He keeps announcing great tariff deals after tough negotiations. He is second-guessed about the attack on Iran, but no boots on the ground. He goes in surgically, achieves our mission, destroys their nuclear weapons development capability, and then he withdraws. This is not like Iraq, where they lied us into war about yellow cake uranium that didn't exist, or involvement in 9/11 that didn't really happen. So I think he made the right call there, even though I had some skepticism during the debate. So he's had a great several weeks. The Dow is at record levels. The revenues generated by the tariffs are extraordinary. This is a distraction, but it's a distraction in which his fundamental credibility is being challenged. He said that he would release all of the Epstein material as a candidate, and I think Kash Patel, who I know quite well, is telling the truth when he says we don't have proof that he was blackmailing people. We don't have proof that he was supplying underage children to elites. That's because the proof was destroyed by the previous administration. We saw in the raids on Epstein's New York apartment, on his island, on his apartment in Paris, his ranch in New Mexico, we saw law enforcement officials carrying out boxes of DVDs and hard drives. I don't think there was ever a list per se, but a list could be compiled simply by watching those. Now, I understand why they can't be released. Not only would they be pornographic, but they would expose the identifications of his victims. But that material, my guess is long gone. Therefore, Patel and Bongino are telling the truth.
We're speaking with Roger Stone, author of the book The Clintons' War on Women, available online at EpsteinTruthBook.com. Roger, let's shift gears here and talk about our governor, California Governor Gavin Newsom, who swears up and down that he has sub-zero interest in running for president. Yet this week he spent his time in the state of South Carolina meeting with voters in diners, meeting with elected officials, holding public events, doing media interviews. He then moved on from South Carolina to Tennessee. Before we get to Newsom specifically, as someone who's advised many politicians, many presidents, senators over the years, why is it that in this profession, and this is the one profession I can think of, where ambition is denied and for whatever reason it's not something that people are honest about? If you talk to someone who's playing in AAA baseball and you say, "What are your goals in life? What would you like to do?" They'll look you in the eye and they say, "I want to play at Yankee Stadium. I want to play in the major leagues." And they'll say that in just about any other profession because it's expected. It would be rational to say something like that. Yet for whatever reason in politics, everyone wants to deny that they're running for something when it's clear that they are.
John, I think the answer is because timing is everything. And you would know this better than I. He hasn't consolidated things back home in terms of being perceived as an actual candidate. Should he be succeeded by Kamala Harris in the governor's office? You wrote a great piece on this for the Orange County Register, I believe. He'd have a rival who still wants to be president and has a power base in the Golden State. So I think the time is not right. On the other hand, if I were advising him right now and he wanted to run for president, I would, of course, be telling him to say that he's not interested in running for president. It's just premature.
What kind of candidate do you think he would be in the Democratic primary? And I say that because if you think about, well, who knows what their calendar is going to be because they changed it to save Grampy Joe the last time by putting states like Georgia and South Carolina and Michigan at the front of the line. But assuming that it's the traditional calendar where it's Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, and you look at the voting electorates of those states, I don't see Gavin Newsom doing well. What kind of candidate do you think he would make in a Democratic primary where he's going to run against people who have appeal to some of those constituencies that matter in those states?
Well, first of all, I don't think he's a great retail politician. I mean, California is a big media state. You get elected statewide office by being able to spend enormous amounts of money on paid media. Yet in Iowa and in New Hampshire, as my governor, Ron DeSantis, found out the hard way, they want you to come sit at their kitchen table more than once. I don't think that Gavin Newsom has the patience for that, nor the aptitude for that. So I don't think he would be a strong candidate for those early contests. And he's not nearly as well known as a brand as he might think that he is. And then he has the Dukakis problem, which is to say, people will say of his candidacy, he will do for America what he did for California, which is not exactly in the greatest shape. Not very hard to get footage of what's going on in downtown L.A. right now. I hate to say it, but this is the world's largest, outdoor toilet. You have a crime problem, you have a drug problem. They have turned the Golden State into a high-tax state. How's that reconstruction going in L.A. where they had the fire, by the way? Oh, I guess it's not. I'm not sure how you run as the failed governor of a big state. He's got the same problem as J.B. Pritzker.
What kind of dirty tricks do you think we're going to see coming out of the Democratic Party towards Kamala Harris? And I say that because if she runs for governor, she'll have the highest name ID in the field by far. She's leading in all of the polls. She would be the heavy favorite to be the next governor of California. But if she were to win and consolidate her power and become the current governor of California, then that puts her at the top of the list of Democratic candidates for president in 2028. and they've already seen the end of that movie before. They cannot nominate her a second time. But if she wins in California, she's definitely going to be running for president in 2028. Do you think they're going to try to stop her in California by releasing negative stories about her or getting behind other candidates, whatever the case may be?
Well, they could just let her talk, and that might do the trick. I mean, it is kind of a mystery to me how she got as far as she did, because she was literally the worst candidate I've ever seen, just in terms of her ability to communicate. She could barely get out a coherent sentence. The only one who was worse than she was Joe Biden, but he has an excuse. He had senile dementia. In her case, she rarely made any sense at all. And let's face it, her closing message for her own candidacy was, Trump is Hitler, and if you're voting for him, you must be a Nazi. That's not a very uplifting, inspiring closing message for a presidential candidate.
Which candidate do they have, do you think, would be the most electorally sellable?
Well, they have a revolution going on in their party, and it's going to be very problematic. When people like AOC think that Chuck Schumer is too conservative to be in party leadership, they have a very serious problem. You've seen this in the New York City Democrat primary last week, where they nominated a guy who says openly, violence is a social construct. We need to do away with cash bail. We need to defund the police, and we need to open Rikers Island and let everybody go. This guy got 46% of the vote in the Democrat primary, and he's on his way, I think, to be being mayor. So the left wing of the party is going to be challenged by the far left wing of the Democrat Party. I don't think that party is capable of nominating a moderate. What Bill Clinton was able to pull off in the 90s, I don't think can be replicated. If you look at those early contests, I mean, I looked at some of that polling, and the Democrat Party of Harry Truman, the Democrat Party of John F. Kennedy, party that believed in free enterprise, capitalism, a strong national defense, God. Sure, they wanted to spend a bit more and tax a bit more than the Republicans, but that party no longer exists. This is a progressive neo-Marxist party at this point. I don't think their process can nominate a centrist. I think it's impossible.
Roger Stone, author of the book The Clintons' War on Women. You can also listen to him on the airwaves of WABC in the Big Apple. His show airs Monday through Friday at 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern, and on Sundays at 3 o'clock Eastern, noon Pacific on WABC. You can get that online at WABC.com. Roger, thanks so much for stopping by.
John, great to be with you again. Many thanks.
It's the John Phillips Show. It's the John Phillips Show on this Jimmy Buffett Friday. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And if you want to weigh in on any of the topics that we've discussed this week, I know it's been a very busy news week, give us a call at 800-222-5222, 1-800-222-5222, and we'll see if we can work in some calls before the end of the week. It's the John Phillips Show. It's the John Phillips Show. 800-222-5222 is the telephone number. 1-800-222-5222. In our last interview with Roger Stone, he talked about the New York City mayoral election where a socialist candidate, Mamdani, was able to win the Democratic primary and now is the heavy favorite to become the next mayor of New York City. And a lot of people, including a caller from earlier in the program who was talking about that election and those results, who came from a communist country, said she couldn't believe that anyone would be willing to vote for someone who carries those beliefs. And I mentioned this before. I mentioned it on Fox 11 with Alex Michelson, and I've made reference to it on the program, but I want to get into it a little bit more while we have time before the weekends about when this actually almost happened here in the state of California. During the Great Depression, when FDR was president, a lot of people had a lot of anxiety about finances, not just the finances of our economy, but their own personal finances. People were freaking out. People were getting laid off. Unemployment was very high. The global economy was collapsing. And extreme ideologies like socialism and communism, which were regarded as being not in the mainstream, were now being flirted with many people, by many people. And one of those ideologies, of course, was socialism. And so you had this writer, Upton Sinclair, who wrote the book The Jungle, about the meatpacking industry in Chicago and how labor is being exploited by management and all of the things that socialists talk about. And usually that sort of thing is just dismissed. That sort of thing has its audience, it's a niche audience, but it's something that doesn't capture the public at large. And that's basically who he was. He was one of these weirdos that would just run for office as a socialist. I think he started out in New Jersey or someplace like that. And he'd run and he'd get 1% and he'd lose. And then he'd come back and he'd run and he'd get 1% and he'd lose. And it's basically what happens to all of these candidates who run as a Green Party candidate or a libertarian or natural law or socialist, communist, whatever. They have their audience. It's pretty much the same everywhere. And they don't win elections. In Europe, they can because it's a parliamentary system and it's proportional representation. But here, it doesn't work that way. It's winner take all, and they can't get a majority. So what he decided he would do is he was living in Pasadena at the time, and he wanted to run for governor of California and realized that running as a socialist was just another suicide mission. But he thought, given the dynamics of the Great Depression, that it was his opportunity to sell it to the people of California. And so he finessed his socialist ideology into a program called the EPIC program, EPIC, and it stood for End Poverty in California. Who's not for that? But you read his program, and it was basically the government needs to own the means of production, which is the same thing that this candidate in New York City is advocating for. So what Upton Sinclair wanted was he wanted the government in California to own the film industry. He wanted the government to take over the factories. He wanted the government to take over the farms. He wanted the government to own all of the means of production in California. Now, what that means when you actually play it out, I'm not sure. Do you use eminent domain and do you just say, hey, this factory used to belong to you and now it doesn't. Now it belongs to us. So we'll give you this because this is what we think it's worth. And now it's going to be run like the DMV. I don't know because we've never done that before here. But that's what he wanted to do. And California back then was a Republican state. Now, granted, even Republican states during the Depression were flirting with more government programs, more government spending, that sort of thing. So he ran in the Democratic primary, and the Democratic primary was very crowded. There were 1 million Democrats running because the incumbent governor had died. The lieutenant governor, who had very minimal political skills, a guy by the name of Frank Merriam out of Long Beach, became the governor. And the Democrats saw it as an opportunity to pick up that seat, something they had wanted for a very long period of time, but never could obtain. And so a bunch of them ran. And because he was basically a celebrity candidate, he was a famous author. And this was before reality TV. This was before the internet. This was before social media. So if you were a big-time best-selling author, you were someone that people knew. And in a crowded field, this socialist candidate was able to win the Democratic primary. Also, don't forget, the primaries were different back then than they are now. Now we have top two. Back then, that wasn't the case. So he emerged from the Democratic primary as the winner, as the Democratic candidate for governor on this hardcore socialist platform. Now, if you're the Democratic Party at that time, you have a lot of questions you need to answer. Namely, do we want an association with a guy like this with ideas like that? And most of the Democrats got behind him, including the people who work for the Democratic president, FDR. Many of FDR's advisors helped Upton Sinclair. Not all were sold on him, but some were, because FDR had people working for him who had the same ideology as Upton Sinclair. FDR, however, was a little bit more hesitant to get behind the guy because he knew that the socialist branding of the New Deal would be toxic for him and toxic for the Democratic Party. So he kept arm's length distance between himself and Upton Sinclair. The Republicans in California had to answer a question themselves, which is, what do we do about this? Because we know the public is afraid. We know the public doesn't like what they're seeing, both domestically and internationally. People are freaking out. They think they're going to go hungry. They think they're going to go broke. What do we do about this with this socialist candidate when we are selling capitalism at a time when capitalism is, let's just say, not at its peak of popularity? And the answer was they used the modern media to kneecap this guy. They used the modern media very effectively, or then modern media, to make sure that the public knew what kind of unique threat this guy posed. And back then, the newspapers, the movie houses were largely run by people who were right of center. MGM, Metro Goldwyn Mayer, Louis B. Mayer, the man behind the MGM logo, the man behind the MGM movie company. He was once chairman of the California Republican Party. Not a lot of people know that, but that was true. And Louis B. Mayer and William Randolph Hearst and the Chandler family, the family that owned the LA Times, all got together. And they said, if this guy wins, that's the end of it for us. You're not going to make any movies. I'm not going to be able to publish my newspaper. And William Randolph Hearst wasn't going to be able to do all the things that he was doing, which included a large newspaper chain. So they decided they needed to tell the story as to what socialism in California would look like. And they turned those newspapers and they turned those movie houses into an arm of political information that got out. And they took shots at this guy every chance they had. Every time they published a newspaper, every time you'd go in to see a movie, they'd show a newsreel before the movie, and they told you how awful socialism would be for California. And they were just relentless. They went on and on and on, and they got the message out, and they repeated it over and over and over again. And this guy, the socialist candidate, didn't know what hit him. He was putting out these socialist pamphlets, and he was trying to compete in his own way, but he took a knife to a gunfight, and he didn't know what he was up against. And the more he would complain and the more that he would push back, the harder they hit him. He'd hit him with a hammer, they'd hit him with a sledge knife, and it just went on and on and on. And ultimately, he was defeated in the election by a candidate who couldn't argue his way out of a paper bag. And what happened was the interests, the big business interests, the people who really ran the state of California, not in government, but outside of government, said, all right, this thing is going to go off the rails. We're going to go off the road and into the ravine if we don't take control. And they took control back of their state and kept us from going off the edge. And what's funny is when you go back and you read about what happened in the political science and the history textbooks, they talk about Upton Sinclair as if he's the victim in the story. That he was just the guy who was trying to do good for the people, and the rich people who own the media came out and put all of this nonstop propaganda against him, and they hoodwinked the public into thinking that this guy was some kind of threat to the people. And because of their propaganda machine, they were able to prevent the people from getting the government that they actually wanted. That's how they tell the story in the history books. When in reality, the opposite is true. When in reality, what happened is the people who had something to lose stepped in and saved us from ourselves. That's what happened. In New York, if they want to avoid the socialist candidate from running that city into the ground, they're going to have to do something like that. And there are people who are the modern day William Randolph Hearsts or Chandler families or Louis B. Mayer, namely maybe Rupert Murdoch or the newspaper mogul that owns WABC, people who own newspapers and television stations and things of that nature, Michael Bloomberg. If those individuals want to keep their businesses from being destroyed by the socialist candidate for mayor, they need to do something similar to what happened in California. Because they have the power, in my estimation, to do it. And if you control the money and you control the message, you can do things in elections that are otherwise not possible. Now, it's not just going to have to involve getting the message out there as to how destructive this guy is. They need to pick one candidate and they need to settle on one candidate. Because if you have all of these other also-rans still on the ballot, you're going to split the vote and this joker's going to win again. So that means people with huge egos are going to have to be talked into getting out of the race. So you're going to have to use a carrot and a stick to get them out. Probably more sticks than carrots, but whatever it takes. If New York City is allowed to be run by a nut like this, that city is going to go down the tubes. And I know it's easy to say, well, they brought it on themselves, so let's just let it go to hell. But let me tell you, if New York City goes to hell, that's going to have repercussions that are larger than that city or that state. Because stuff like this spreads. It doesn't stay in one place. It starts somewhere and it moves on to other places. So you're much better off to kill it before it continues. And if this ideology is something that has an audience right now, that ideology needs to be killed at the ballot box. So it can't spread to other places and ruin other cities and ruin other states. So it's very important for the people of New York City to get this one right. And my feeling is, like what happened in California with Upton Sinclair and that socialist candidate, they're going to need a little help. They're going to need a little push. So let's hope that the powers that be in New York give them that help and give them that push. It's the John Phillips Show. It's the John Phillips Show on this Jimmy Buffett Friday. Randy Wang is out on vacation today, but he'll be back with us on Monday. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. Sue from Hesperia emails us and says, "Hi, Johnny. Tomorrow is my birthday. I'm wondering if you would be able to wish me a happy birthday on the air. Thanks so much for bringing humor and politics into our lives. Have an amazing weekend." Happy birthday to Sue from Hesperia. All right, let's go to David in Sonoma. David, hello.
John, loving the show. I started listening to you guys when you were on vacation, and I found you guys on a podcast. You guys do a great job covering the state up and down. That story you told is a great segue for an article I just read in the Wall Street Journal about how Daniel Lurie, the mayor of San Francisco, is teaming up with Brooke Jenkins, and they're enforcing the laws. He's not political. They even did a juxtapose with the guy from New York, you were just talking about how, they asked him what they thought of him, and he said, "Hey, listen, I'm focusing in right here in San Francisco. I'm trying to do this." They're trying to goad him into talking, about different places and different politicians, and he's laser focused on San Francisco. So you guys will enjoy that. I just wanted to share that with you guys.
Well, thanks so much for calling in. And you're right. San Francisco really has improved their city government by electing him as their next mayor and Brooke Jenkins as their district attorney. I would also add that the same thing is going on right now in San Jose with Matt Mahan, where those two cities, those two big Northern California cities, have reached the tipping point where the population has just said, all right, we've had enough. It's time for the pendulum to start swinging in the other direction, and we're going to go back to the way it used to be, where if you broke the law, you had to deal with the consequences, and if you don't want to have to deal with the consequences, don't break the law. And somewhere that got bastardized into go ahead and do whatever you want, and there will be no consequences. Well, okay, go ahead and try that and see what the result is. The result is we all have to buy our shampoo behind bulletproof glass, and then eventually the Rite Aid or the Walgreens or the Target or whatever ends up shutting their doors because they're not profitable. That's how we've lived our life the last several years here in the state of California, and it's no way to live. And if you're a regular traveler like I am, and you go to places like Texas or Florida or other places, they don't live like that, and neither should we. All right, that's going to do it for us today, but we'll be back on Monday at noon for another edition of The John Phillips Show.